The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as 10-year-old Prince George walked alongside his protection officer toward the main entrance. It was a crisp autumn day in October, and the young prince was returning from his riding lesson at the palace stables. His cheeks were still flushed from the cool air, and there was mud on his boots from the stable yard. Sergeant James Mitchell had been standing guard at the palace entrance for nearly 6 hours. At 42 years old, he was a veteran of the Queen's Guard, with over 15 years of service. His black uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his bearskin hat sat precisely as regulations demanded. He had served in Afghanistan, protected royal residences across London, and had never once broken protocol during his duty. As Prince George approached the entrance, something unusual caught his attention. Sergeant Mitchell was standing absolutely still, as always. But there was something different about his breathing. The young prince had grown up around palace guards and had learned to notice the small details that others might miss. The sergeant's breathing seemed labored, and despite the cool October air, there appeared to be perspiration on his forehead beneath the heavy bearskin hat. Prince George paused near the entrance, his protection officer continuing a few steps before realizing the prince had stopped. The training that Prince William and Catherine had given their eldest son about observing and caring for others kicked in. George had been taught that being royal meant being aware of those around him and showing consideration for everyone, regardless of their position. The young prince studied the guard more carefully. Sergeant Mitchell's face was pale, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that he was clearly trying to control. George had seen his grandfather, King Charles, interact with guards and staff many times, always with respect and genuine concern for their well-being. His parents had instilled in him the importance of treating every person with dignity and kindness. Without hesitation, Prince George approached the guard directly. Protocol dictated that guards on duty should not engage in conversation or break their stance, but the young prince had learned from watching his family that sometimes human compassion was more important than rigid rules. "Excuse me, sir," Prince George said quietly, his voice carrying the well-mannered tone his parents had taught him. "Are you feeling all right? You look like you might need to sit down." Sergeant Mitchell's eyes moved slightly to acknowledge the prince, but he maintained his position. Years of training had taught him never to break rank while on duty, no matter what. However, the genuine concern in the young prince's voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the casual curiosity of a child, but rather a sincere worry for another person's welfare. Prince George noticed the guard's reluctance to respond and understood immediately. He had grown up watching the formal protocols that governed palace life, but he had also learned when those protocols needed to be set aside for more important matters. His mother, Princess Catherine, had often told him that kindness should never be constrained by formality. "I'm Prince George," he said, though he knew the guard was well aware of his identity. "And I can see you're not feeling well. It's okay to tell me if you need help." The protection officer who had been accompanying Prince George watched from a respectful distance, recognizing that something significant was happening. He had witnessed many interactions between the royal family and palace staff, but there was something particularly touching about watching the young prince demonstrate such genuine concern for someone he had never spoken to before. Sergeant Mitchell felt his resolve wavering slightly. The truth was, he had been feeling unwell for the past hour. A wave of dizziness had come over him during the middle of his shift, and he had been fighting to maintain his composure ever since. His pride and sense of duty had prevented him from requesting relief. But the combination of the heavy uniform, the extended standing, and what he suspected might be the beginning of a fever was making it increasingly difficult to continue. "Your Royal Highness," Sergeant Mitchell said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I appreciate your concern, but I am perfectly capable of completing my duty." Prince George studied the man's face more carefully and could see that despite his words, the guard was clearly struggling. The young prince had inherited his mother's ability to read people's emotions and his father's determination to help when help was needed. He also remembered something his great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had told him before she passed away, that true leadership meant caring for those who served, not just being served by them. "I know you're very good at your job," Prince George replied with a maturity that surprised even his protection officer. "But being good at your job also means knowing when you need help." and I think you need help right now." The simple honesty of the statement struck Sergeant Mitchell profoundly. Here was a 10-year-old boy, destined to one day be King of England, showing more genuine concern for his well-being than many of his superior officers had ever demonstrated. The contrast between the prince's youth and his emotional intelligence was remarkable. Prince George looked around and noticed a small bench near the entrance that was typically used by off-duty staff taking breaks. Without waiting for permission or guidance from his protection officer, he made a decision that would later be talked about throughout the palace. "Would you please sit down on that bench for just a minute?" Prince George asked. "I promise no one will be upset with you. I'll make sure of that." Sergeant Mitchell felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. The dizzy spell was getting worse, and he was genuinely concerned that he might faint while on duty, which would be far more embarrassing than accepting help from the young prince. There was something about Prince George's manner that made it clear this wasn't a childish whim, but rather a genuine desire to help. "I cannot leave my post, Your Royal Highness," Sergeant Mitchell replied, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Prince George thought for a moment, then walked over to his protection officer. The two had a brief, quiet conversation that the guard couldn't hear. The protection officer nodded and pulled out his radio, speaking quietly into it for a few moments. Within minutes, another guard appeared from inside the palace. Prince George had arranged for temporary relief so that Sergeant Mitchell could take a break without abandoning his duties. The efficiency with which the young prince had solved the problem impressed everyone who witnessed it. "Now will you please sit down?" Prince George asked, returning to the guard. "Someone else is here to cover your post, and you can go back to work when you feel better." Sergeant Mitchell looked at the replacement guard, then back at Prince George. The kindness and determination in the boy's eyes made it impossible to refuse any longer. Slowly, and with as much dignity as he could maintain, the sergeant walked the few steps to the bench and sat down. The relief of sitting down was immediate and overwhelming. Sergeant Mitchell realized that he had been pushing himself much harder than he should have, and that Prince George's intervention had likely prevented a much more serious situation. As he sat there, catching his breath and feeling his strength slowly return, he was struck by the profound kindness he had just experienced. Prince George approached the bench and, to everyone's surprise, sat down next to the guard. This was highly unusual protocol, but the young prince seemed unconcerned with formalities when someone needed help. "How are you feeling now?" Prince George asked. "Do you need some water? I can ask someone to bring you some." The simplicity and sincerity of the offer moved Sergeant Mitchell deeply. In his 15 years of service, he had been shouted at by officers, ignored by dignitaries, and treated as invisible by countless important visitors. But here was a member of the royal family, a child who would one day rule the country, treating him with more respect and genuine care than he had ever experienced in his professional life. "I'm feeling much better, thank you, Your Royal Highness," Sergeant Mitchell replied. "I think I just needed a moment to rest." Prince George nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes, adults don't take care of themselves very well," he said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possess. "My mum is always telling my dad to take breaks when he's working too hard." The comment made Sergeant Mitchell smile despite himself. The idea that even Prince William needed reminding to take care of himself was both amusing and somehow comforting. It made the guard feel less embarrassed about his own moment of weakness. As they sat together on the bench, other palace staff began to notice what was happening. Word spread quickly through the building that Prince George had stopped his own activities to help a guard who was feeling unwell. The story grew with each telling, but the core truth remained the same. The young prince had shown extraordinary kindness and maturity. Princess Catherine emerged from the palace about 10 minutes later, having been informed by security about the situation. When she saw her son sitting next to the guard, talking quietly and ensuring his well-being, her heart swelled with pride. This was exactly the kind of person she and William had hoped to raise. Someone who understood that privilege came with responsibility, and that responsibility included caring for others. "George," she called gently as she approached. "I heard you've been taking very good care of Sergeant Mitchell." Prince George stood up as his mother approached, but remained close to the bench where the guard was sitting. "He wasn't feeling well, Mum," George explained. I thought he should sit down for a bit. Princess Catherine smiled at her son, then turned to address the guard. Sergeant Mitchell, I hope you're feeling better now. Please don't hesitate to take whatever time you need. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, Sergeant Mitchell replied, beginning to stand. I'm much better now. Thanks to Prince George's kindness. Please, stay seated until you're completely ready, Princess Catherine insisted. George, why don't you tell me what happened? As Prince George recounted the events of the past 20 minutes, Sergeant Mitchell listened with growing amazement. The young prince described his concern for the guard's well-being with the same seriousness he might use to discuss a school project or family event. There was no sense of self-congratulation or pride in his voice, just a straightforward explanation of why he had acted as he did. Other members of the palace staff had gathered at a respectful distance, all watching the unusual scene unfold. It was rare to see such direct interaction between the royal family and the guards, and the kindness being displayed was remarkable, even by the high standards set by Prince William and Princess Catherine in their own interactions with staff. The head of palace security, Colonel Sarah Thompson, arrived shortly after Princess Catherine. She had been concerned when she heard reports of a guard needing medical attention, but when she saw the scene at the entrance, her concern transformed into admiration. Prince George had handled the situation with a combination of authority and compassion that would have been impressive in someone twice his age. Your Royal Highness, Colonel Thompson addressed Prince George formally, I understand you noticed that Sergeant Mitchell was unwell and took action to ensure his safety. Prince George nodded. He looked like he was going to fall down. He explained simply. I thought someone should help him. The directness of the response struck everyone present. There was no elaborate explanation, no attempt to make himself look good. Just a clear statement of what he had observed and why he had acted. It was a level of emotional intelligence and leadership that spoke well for his future role as king. Sergeant Mitchell, feeling much steadier now, attempted to stand again. This time, Prince George didn't stop him, but watched carefully to make sure he was truly ready to resume his duties. Your Royal Highness, Sergeant Mitchell said, his voice stronger now. I want to thank you for your kindness. I've been doing this job for many years, and no one has ever shown me such consideration. Prince George looked slightly confused by the statement. But that's just what you're supposed to do when someone needs help, isn't it? He asked innocently. The question hung in the air, highlighting the natural goodness that Prince George's parents had nurtured in him. For him, helping someone in need wasn't extraordinary. It was simply the right thing to do. His surprise that such behavior was unusual revealed both his good character and the sheltered nature of his upbringing, where kindness and consideration were the expected norm. Princess Catherine put her hand on her son's shoulder, her pride evident in her expression. Yes, George, she said gently. That is exactly what you're supposed to do, and you did it perfectly. As the immediate crisis passed and normal palace routines began to resume, the impact of what had happened started to become clear. Word of Prince George's actions spread throughout the palace staff with remarkable speed. Guards talked to housekeepers, who mentioned it to kitchen staff, who shared it with gardeners. By evening, virtually everyone who worked at the palace had heard about the young prince's kindness. What made the story particularly powerful was not just the act of kindness itself, but the way Prince George had carried it out. He had approached the situation with confidence and authority when necessary, but also with humility and genuine concern. He had navigated the complex protocols of palace life, while prioritizing human compassion over rigid formality. The story also highlighted the character development that Prince William and Princess Catherine had been working to instill in their children. They had often spoken publicly about wanting their children to understand both their privileged position and their responsibility to use that privilege in service of others. Prince George's actions demonstrated that these lessons were taking root in meaningful ways. As evening fell over Kensington Palace, Sergeant Mitchell completed his shift with renewed energy and a story he would treasure for the rest of his life. The brief interaction with Prince George had reminded him why he was proud to serve the royal family and had given him a glimpse of the kind of king the young prince might one day become. The events of that autumn day would be remembered and retold throughout the palace for years to come. But for Prince George himself, it was simply another day when he saw someone who needed help and did what he could to provide it. His parents had taught him well, and the palace staff had seen a preview of the compassionate leadership that might one day guide the monarchy into the future. The following morning brought an unexpected development to the story that had already captivated the palace staff. Sergeant Mitchell arrived for his shift to find a handwritten note waiting for him in the guard station. The cream-colored paper bore the distinctive letterhead of Prince George's personal correspondence, something that was typically reserved for official communications or special occasions. The note was written in Prince George's careful handwriting, which still showed the precision of someone who had been recently learning cursive writing. The message was brief but heartfelt. Dear Sergeant Mitchell, I hope you are feeling much better today. Thank you for being such a good guard and keeping everyone safe. I hope we can talk again soon. Your friend, Prince George. The other guards gathered around to read the note, and the simple sincerity of it moved them all. In their years of service, none of them had ever received personal correspondence from a member of the royal family. The fact that Prince George had taken the time to write it by hand, rather than having it typed or dictated, made it even more special. Word of the note spread just as quickly as the original story had, but this time, it reached beyond the palace walls. The Prince and Princess of Wales had always been careful about their children's privacy. But when palace staff shared the story with their own families, it began to circulate through London's tight-knit community of royal employees and their extended networks. By midday, the story had reached the offices of several British newspapers. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for years were intrigued by what seemed to be a genuine demonstration of character from the young prince. However, out of respect for the family's privacy policies regarding their children, most outlets chose not to publish the story without official confirmation. Princess Catherine learned about the wider circulation of the story when her private secretary mentioned it during their daily briefing. Rather than being concerned about the publicity, she felt a sense of pride that her son's natural kindness was being recognized. She decided to speak with Prince George about what had happened and how his actions had affected others. That afternoon, she found Prince George in the palace library, working on his homework. The library was one of his favorite places in the palace, with its tall windows overlooking the gardens and its shelves filled with books that had belonged to generations of his family. George, Princess Catherine said as she sat down beside him, I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday with Sergeant Mitchell. Prince George looked up from his mathematics worksheet, his expression curious but not concerned. Is he feeling better today? He asked immediately, his first thought being for the guard's well-being. Yes, he's much better, Princess Catherine assured him. But I wanted to talk to you about how your kindness has affected other people. Did you know that you wrote him a note this morning? Prince George nodded. I thought he might like to know that someone was thinking about him, he explained. When I'm not feeling well, I like it when people check on me. The simplicity of his reasoning was exactly what Princess Catherine had expected, but it still filled her with maternal pride. Her son had instinctively understood the importance of follow-up care and emotional support, concepts that many adults struggled with. Well, Princess Catherine continued, your note meant a great deal to Sergeant Mitchell. In fact, all of the guards have been talking about how kind you were yesterday, and the story has spread to other people who work here at the palace. Prince George considered this information thoughtfully. Is that bad? He asked, showing the concern of a child who might have inadvertently broken some unknown rule. Not at all, his mother assured him quickly. It's wonderful. People are talking about your kindness because it inspired them. Sometimes, when people see others doing good things, it encourages them to be kinder too. This concept seemed to interest Prince George greatly. He had been learning in his history lessons about how the actions of kings and queens throughout history had influenced their subjects and their countries. The idea that his own small action might have a ripple effect was both exciting and sobering for him. So when I helped Sergeant Mitchell, it helped other people too? He asked, working through the logic. Exactly, Princess Catherine confirmed. When people in positions of leadership show kindness and compassion, it encourages everyone around them to behave the same way. That's one of the responsibilities that comes with being part of our family. Prince George had heard similar lessons before, but experiencing it firsthand made the concept much more real and meaningful. He was beginning to understand that his actions carried weight beyond their immediate impact, and that understanding would shape his behavior for years to come. Later that afternoon, Prince George encountered several palace staff members during his walk through the corridors. Each interaction was subtly different from before. The housekeeping staff smiled more warmly. The kitchen workers made a point of saying hello, and even the usually formal protocol officers seemed more relaxed in his presence. The change was not dramatic, but it was noticeable. Prince George's demonstration of genuine concern for a guard's well-being had shifted something in the palace dynamic. Staff members felt more valued and recognized, and they responded with increased warmth and engagement. During dinner that evening, Prince William joined the conversation about the previous day's events. As someone who had grown up in the public eye and understood the weight of royal responsibility, he was particularly proud of how his son had handled the situation. "George," Prince William said as they sat around the family dining table, "your mother tells me you've been thinking about how your actions affect other people." "Yes," Prince George replied, carefully cutting his vegetables as he had been taught. "Mum explained that when we're kind to people, it helps them want to be kind to other people too." Prince William nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. And it's especially true for people in our family, because many people look to us as examples of how to behave." The conversation continued throughout dinner, with Prince William sharing stories from his own childhood about times when small acts of kindness had made significant differences. He told George about visiting hospitals with his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and seeing how her genuine interest in patients' well-being had brightened their entire experience. "The important thing," Prince William explained, "is that your kindness yesterday came naturally to you. You didn't do it because you thought people were watching, or because you wanted to look good. You did it because you saw someone who needed help, and you wanted to help them." Prince George nodded thoughtfully. "It just seemed like the right thing to do," he said simply. "And that," Prince William said with a smile, "is exactly the kind of instinct that will make you a good king someday." The weight of that statement wasn't lost on Prince George. Even at his young age, he had always known that he would one day be king. But conversations like this helped him understand what that role would actually require of him. It wasn't just about ceremonies and formal duties, it was about genuinely caring for the people he would serve. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to Kensington Palace. Sergeant Mitchell's father, a retired military man named Robert Mitchell, had asked for permission to meet Prince George. The request was unusual, but given the circumstances, it was granted. Robert Mitchell was a man of few words, shaped by decades of military service and a working-class upbringing that valued action over sentiment. When he met Prince George in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms, his message was direct and heartfelt. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice carrying the same formal tone his son used while on duty. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my son James." Prince George, dressed in his school uniform since the meeting was taking place after his classes, listened attentively as the older man continued. "James has been in the military for over 15 years, Robert Mitchell explained, "and he's served in some very difficult places. But he told me that what you did last week was one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for him in his professional life." The statement surprised Prince George, who still didn't fully understand why his actions had been seen as so extraordinary. "I just wanted to make sure he was okay," Prince George replied honestly. Robert Mitchell smiled at the response. "That's exactly what makes it so special, Your Royal Highness. You saw a person who needed help, and you helped him. You didn't see a guard, or a uniform, or someone whose job it was to serve you. You saw a human being." The distinction was important, and Prince George sensed its significance even if he didn't fully grasp all its implications. Throughout his life, he had been taught to see people as individuals rather than as their roles or positions. But hearing it articulated so clearly by Sergeant Mitchell's father reinforced the lesson powerfully. "James wanted me to give you this," Robert Mitchell continued, pulling out a small, carefully wrapped package. "It's nothing fancy, but it has special meaning to our family." Inside the package was a small military medal, worn and tarnished with age. Robert Mitchell explained that it had belonged to his own father, who had served in World War II, and had been passed down through the family as a symbol of service and honor. "We don't have much to offer a prince," Robert Mitchell said with quiet dignity. "But this represents 3 generations of my family's service to the crown. James wanted you to have it because you showed him what true leadership looks like." Prince George accepted the medal with the solemnity that the moment deserved. He understood that he was receiving something far more valuable than gold or jewels. He was receiving a family's recognition of his character and their trust in his future leadership. Princess Catherine, who had been present for the meeting, watched with tears in her eyes as her son carefully examined the medal and thanked Robert Mitchell for the honor. The exchange represented everything she and Prince William hoped to instill in their children: respect for service, appreciation for sacrifice, and understanding of the deep connections between the royal family and the people they served. After Robert Mitchell left, Prince George spent a long time looking at the medal and thinking about what it represented. That evening, he asked his parents if he could display it in his room, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the responsibility that came with his position. The story of the medal and its presentation spread through the palace just as the original story had, but with an added dimension of respect and admiration. The staff began to see Prince George not just as a kind child, but as someone who was growing into his role with wisdom and humility. Palace Security Chief Colonel Thompson made a note in her daily report about the incident, writing, "Prince George continues to demonstrate natural leadership qualities and genuine concern for staff well-being. His actions are building strong relationships and positive morale throughout the palace community." As autumn turned to winter, the effects of Prince George's kindness continued to ripple through the palace. Guards began checking on each other more regularly during long shifts. Staff members showed increased consideration for their colleagues' well-being. The overall atmosphere in the palace became more collegial and supportive. Prince George himself seemed largely unaware of these changes, continuing to treat everyone he encountered with the same natural courtesy and concern he had always shown. But those around him could see that something fundamental had shifted in the palace dynamics. And it all traced back to one moment of genuine human kindness on a crisp October morning. 3 months after the initial incident, Sergeant Mitchell found himself assigned to a special detail that would bring the story full circle in an unexpected way. The royal family was hosting a reception for military veterans and their families, an annual event that honored those who had served in the British Armed Forces. As one of the palace's most experienced guards, Sergeant Mitchell was chosen to help coordinate security for the event. The reception was held in the grand ballroom of Kensington Palace, with its crystal chandeliers casting warm light over the gathered guests. Veterans from conflicts spanning several decades mingled with current service members and their families, creating an atmosphere of respect and camaraderie that filled the ornate space. Prince George, now more confident in his public role after months of growth and learning, was attending his first major military reception. His parents had felt he was ready to participate in such an important event, particularly given his demonstrated maturity and genuine interest in the people who served the crown. As the reception began, Prince George moved through the room with his parents, meeting veterans and hearing their stories. His natural curiosity and sincere interest in people's experiences made these conversations meaningful for both him and the guests. He asked thoughtful questions about their service and listened intently to their responses. Sergeant Mitchell watched from his position near the ballroom entrance, managing the flow of guests and coordinating with other security personnel. He felt a deep sense of pride seeing Prince George interact so naturally with the military community, knowing that the young prince's character had been demonstrated not just in public settings but in private moments of genuine caring. Halfway through the reception, an elderly veteran named Arthur Pembroke began to feel unwell. The 80-year-old former Royal Navy sailor had been standing for an extended period, and the warmth of the crowded room, combined with his excitement at meeting the royal family, had made him dizzy and lightheaded. Arthur tried to maintain his composure, not wanting to cause a disruption at such an important event. He had served on destroyers during the Falklands War and prided himself on his resilience and self-reliance. However, as the dizziness intensified, he began to worry that he might faint in front of the distinguished gathering. Prince George, who had been speaking with another veteran nearby, noticed Arthur's distress almost immediately. The months since his encounter with Sergeant Mitchell had sharpened his ability to recognize when someone was struggling, and he saw the telltale signs of physical discomfort that he had learned to identify. Without hesitation, Prince George excused himself from his current conversation and approached Arthur Pembroke directly. The similarity to his earlier encounter with Sergeant Mitchell was not lost on him, but this time, he felt more confident in his ability to help. "Sir," Prince George said quietly, approaching Arthur with the same gentle concern he had shown to Sergeant Mitchell. "Are you feeling all right? You look like you might need to sit down." Arthur looked down at the young prince, surprised by both his approach and his perceptive observation. "I'm perfectly fine, Your Royal Highness," Arthur replied automatically, though his pale complexion and unsteady stance suggested otherwise. Prince George recognized the polite deflection, having heard similar responses from Sergeant Mitchell months earlier. He had learned that sometimes people needed permission to accept help, particularly those who had spent their lives in service to others. "I can see that you're very strong," Prince George said with the diplomatic skill that was becoming natural to him. "But even strong people need to rest sometimes. Would you please come with me to find somewhere comfortable to sit?" The gentle but authoritative tone in Prince George's voice was remarkably similar to what Sergeant Mitchell had experienced. Arthur found himself unable to refuse the young prince's caring insistence, particularly when it was delivered with such genuine concern. Prince George guided Arthur toward a quiet alcove where several chairs had been arranged for guests who needed to rest. As they walked, he maintained a steady conversation to help Arthur feel at ease and to assess his condition without making him feel self-conscious. "Have you been enjoying the reception?" Prince George asked, as they settled into comfortable chairs away from the main crowd. "Very much, Your Royal Highness," Arthur replied, already feeling better now that he was seated. "It's wonderful to see how much the royal family values military service." Prince George nodded thoughtfully. "My parents have taught me that people who serve in the military are very special," he said. "They protect everyone else, even when it's dangerous for them." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Prince George demonstrating the same natural ability to put people at ease that had impressed everyone during his encounter with Sergeant Mitchell. Arthur found himself sharing stories about his naval service and his pride in having served his country. From across the room, Sergeant Mitchell watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and recognition. He could see that Prince George was applying the same instincts and compassion that had helped him months earlier, but now with greater confidence and skill. The young prince had clearly learned from their earlier encounter, and was using that knowledge to help someone else in need. Princess Catherine also noticed her son's absence from the main reception, and followed his path to the alcove. When she saw him sitting with Arthur, engaged in deep conversation and ensuring the elderly veteran's comfort, her heart filled with the same maternal pride she had felt during the original incident with Sergeant Mitchell. "George," she said as she approached, "I see you've been taking care of Mr. Pembroke." "He needed to sit down for a bit," Prince George explained matter-of-factly. "He was feeling dizzy, but he's much better now." Arthur looked up at Princess Catherine with gratitude and admiration. "Your Royal Highness, your son has been incredibly kind. He noticed I wasn't feeling well before I even realized it myself, and he's been wonderful company while I recovered." Princess Catherine smiled at both her son and Arthur. "George has always been good at noticing when people need help," she said. "It's one of his best qualities." The comment made Prince George slightly embarrassed, but also pleased that his mother had noticed and appreciated his efforts. He was beginning to understand that his natural inclination to help others was not just a personal characteristic, but an important part of his future role as a leader. As Arthur felt stronger and ready to rejoin the reception, Prince George helped him stand and offered to escort him back to the main gathering. The elderly veteran accepted gratefully, and they walked together toward the ballroom, where other guests were still enjoying conversations with the royal family. Word of Prince George's second act of kindness spread through the reception just as quickly as news had traveled through the palace months earlier. Veterans and their families were deeply moved by the young prince's attentiveness and care, and many commented on how his behavior reflected the values they had fought to protect. Colonel Thompson, who was overseeing security for the event, made note of Prince George's actions in her report. She wrote, "Prince George again demonstrated exceptional awareness and compassion, this time assisting an elderly veteran who was experiencing medical distress. His ability to recognize and respond to people in need continues to impress all observers." Sergeant Mitchell, still at his post by the ballroom entrance, felt a profound sense of validation as he watched Prince George with Arthur Pembroke. The kindness that the young prince had shown him months earlier had not been an isolated incident or a temporary phase. It was clearly a fundamental part of his character that was growing stronger with time and experience. As the reception continued, other guests began sharing their own observations about Prince George's behavior. Many noted how he seemed genuinely interested in their stories, how he asked thoughtful questions, and how he treated everyone with the same level of respect, regardless of their rank or background. The evening concluded with a brief speech from Prince William, thanking the veterans for their service and expressing the royal family's ongoing commitment to supporting the military community. During his remarks, he made a subtle reference to the importance of kindness and compassion in leadership, glancing at Prince George with obvious pride. After the reception ended and the guests had departed, the royal family gathered for a private debriefing about the evening. Prince George shared his experience helping Arthur Pembroke, describing his observations about the veteran's condition and his decision to intervene. "I remembered what happened with Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George explained, "and I thought I should help Mr. Pembroke the same way. It seemed to work pretty well." Prince William and Princess Catherine exchanged meaningful glances, both recognizing that their son was developing a consistent pattern of compassionate leadership that would serve him well throughout his life. "You did exactly the right thing," Prince William told his son. "The ability to notice when people need help, and the courage to provide it, are among the most important qualities a leader can have." The months that followed saw Prince George continuing to demonstrate the same natural kindness and awareness that had characterized his interactions with both Sergeant Mitchell and Arthur Pembroke. Palace staff began to anticipate his thoughtful gestures and considerate behavior, and visiting dignitaries often commented on his remarkable maturity and genuine interest in others. Sergeant Mitchell remained at his post at Kensington Palace, but his relationship with the royal family had been permanently changed by Prince George's kindness. He approached his duties with renewed pride and purpose, knowing that he served a family that truly valued the people who worked for them. The story of Prince George's kindness became part of palace lore, told and retold by staff members who wanted to share examples of genuine royal character with their families and friends. The tale grew in the telling, but the core truth remained constant. A young prince had seen people in need and had acted with natural compassion to help them. Years later, when Prince George had grown into his teenage years and was taking on more official responsibilities, palace staff would still remember those early demonstrations of his character. The kindness he had shown as a 10-year-old boy became the foundation for the respect and affection that would define his relationship with those who served the crown throughout his life. The elderly Arthur Pembroke, inspired by his encounter with Prince George, became an advocate for veterans' welfare programs and often shared the story of the young prince's kindness at community events. His description of Prince George's genuine concern and natural leadership ability helped shape public perception of the future king as someone who truly cared about the people he would one day serve. Sergeant Mitchell continued his military service with distinction, eventually retiring with honors after a career marked by dedication and professionalism. At his retirement ceremony, he spoke about the privilege of serving the royal family and the inspiration he had drawn from Prince George's example of kindness and consideration. The small military medal that had been presented to Prince George by Sergeant Mitchell's father remained displayed in his room throughout his childhood and adolescence, serving as a daily reminder of the connection between royal duty and genuine care for others. The medal represented not just his family's legacy of service, but also Prince George's understanding that true leadership required both authority and compassion. As Prince George matured and took on increasing royal responsibilities, the lessons learned from his early encounters with Sergeant Mitchell and Arthur Pembroke continued to guide his approach to public service. The natural kindness that had emerged so clearly during those formative experiences became a defining characteristic of his leadership style and his relationship with the British people. The palace staff who had witnessed these early demonstrations of Prince George's character often reflected on how his actions had created a lasting culture of mutual respect and consideration within the royal household. The ripple effects of his kindness continued to influence palace dynamics years after the original incidents, creating an environment where everyone felt valued and respected. The story of Prince George's kindness to Sergeant Mitchell and Arthur Pembroke became more than just palace gossip or media interest. It became a genuine reflection of the character and values that would shape the future of the Gaul. British monarchy. In a world often cynical about royal privilege and public service, these simple acts of human kindness offered hope that leadership could still be grounded in genuine care for others. The guard who had once stood rigid at attention, fighting dizziness and pride in equal measure, walked away from his encounters with Prince George not just with renewed health and spirits, but with a deeper understanding of what royal service could mean when it was guided by authentic compassion and natural leadership. His respectful departure from those moments of crisis had been met with kindness that would influence palace culture for years to come, creating a legacy of mutual respect and genuine care that would define Prince George's approach to royal duty throughout his life.